Welcome to Body Kindness. I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, creator of the Body Kindness Philosophy book and audiobook. I'm here to help you create a better life by reinventing health from the body oppressive, shaming, and you'll never be enough type of mindset to positive and joyful ways that you can spiral up your energy, mood, and your well-being at any size, shape, or weight, and as you are right now. Get started for free at bodykindnessbook.com/start. That's the sound of me smashing a stack of scales in front of some friends. And I have to say that breaking up with the scale and all the other ways I was judging, monitoring, and measuring my worth was absolutely pivotal in my life. Creating the body kindness philosophy and letting myself be a human being again helped me become a better mom, a better clinician, and a happier and healthier person. I believe we all have a right to decide how we want to care for ourselves. And I think we all need support in figuring out what that looks like. You don't have to do this alone. There's a whole community of like-minded people who are fed up with diets, who are embracing intuitive eating, and who are completely redefining their lives from body shame to body kindness. You are not broken. Our culture is. Find your inner caregiver and create a better life with body kindness.
For those of us as parents who think we have to hyper-parent and enrich our children's lives in every way and do everything for them and be everything for them and provide everything for them, the answer is you don't have to do all that. You just need to be present and show up. And then for those of us as parents who are distracted, preoccupied, stretched too thin, not caring for ourselves, our kids, the answer is the same. Our kids are saying, I need you to be present. I need you to show up in this moment and give me yourself, and what your kids need most from you is you.
That was Dr. Tina Payne Bryson. She is the co-author with Dan Siegel of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline, each of which has been translated into dozens of languages, as well as The Yes Brain, and 2 upcoming titles, The Power of Showing Up. That is the one we're going to be talking about on today's podcast. And also Bottom Line for Baby. She's the founder and executive director of the Center for Connection, a multidisciplinary clinical practice, and of the Play Strong Institute, a center devoted to the study, research, and practice of play therapy through a neurodevelopmental lens. Dr. Bryson keynotes conferences and conducts workshops for parents, educators, and clinicians all over the world. And she frequently consults with schools, businesses, and other organizations. An LCSW, Tina is a graduate of Baylor University with a Ph.D. from USC. The most important part of her bio, she says, is that she's a mom to her 3 boys. You can learn more about Dr. Bryson at TinaBryson.com. The book, The Power of Showing Up, How Parental Presence Shapes Who Our Kids Become and How Their Brains Get Wired, is out now. I am so honored to bring you this conversation. We had a lot to discuss, and I get personal. I share upfront personal things that I've been going through in my own anxiety and parenting, how that showed up. And I did it just because, as you know, I'm an open book, but also I really, really want to help people who care about children, that we can be human again, that we can make mistakes. And I'm telling you, the 4 S's we talk about today in this book, I've read the previous bestsellers. They've been so helpful to me through the parenting journey. And you'll find in our conversation that even all the way up through adolescence and even adult children of parents, you're going to get something beneficial through our conversation on how to navigate relationships with the 4 S's. Before we get into it, I want to give you a quick reminder that the Body Kindness Book Club is starting in February. It's absolutely free. All you need to do is grab your copy of the book and start getting into it. And even if you've read it before, we welcome you to the free book club. That's on Facebook. It's Body Kindness Insiders. Request to join. Please answer the questions. I really just want to make sure that you answer the terms of use. So thank you so much and enjoy the show. Tina, welcome to Body Kindness.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to chat with you.
Oh, this is such a pleasure and honor for me. I have to tell you that I've been following your work. I swear, since I gave birth, right? My present was having your books with Dan Siegel. They have really been life changing for me in that I don't know. I guess in my mind, it's like, I don't want to mess this up. And then there's this other thought of you're doing it wrong and this kind of self-criticism and fear. And I was like, I need some help. I need some tools. And I love audiobooks. So I got your first two books that you did together on audiobook and just devoured them and really put into practice ways where I could really be there for my kids, especially in the early toddler communication phases where I was like, what's actually happening here? I see a tantrum. And when I had permission to like get down on the ground and cry and act as they were acting and all of a sudden see them open up. And I was like, oh my gosh, this stuff really works. So, I'm coming at this, from a standpoint of having already had significant benefit from the work that you've put out there so far and some interesting challenges that I'm facing today that may come up in the chat. So
Awesome.
I just want to say thank you for everything. And I'd love for you to start by letting listeners know a little bit more about you and your background and the work that you do that matters.
Well, that's great that you asked that question because I was just thinking about as you were sort of telling that story about your parenting journey beginning and looking for tools and searching and finding that some of the strategies in the book were so helpful. And the reason I think that the work in so many ways resonates with parents is because, first of all, the most important thing about me in terms of my bio is I'm a mom to three boys. And, what's really interesting is, and, I have a master's and a PhD in social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I run and founded an interdisciplinary clinical practice, which is so important to my lens because as a therapist, I was seeing kids and teenagers and their parents doing consults with them. And I was finding that so much of the time when kids and families were really struggling, the mental health world or the occupational therapy world or the whatever intervention world that they were seeing was often targeting and trying to address the problematic behaviors without peeling back the layers to understand the why. So I was like, I've got to find a place where all these experts can put their brains together and really look at where is the dysregulation coming from so we can target that. So instead of just treating symptoms, we're looking more at the cause. So I started a place called the Center for Connection. But what's the way that and this is not a story that I've told a lot, and I think it actually is fun and interesting, is that, I was working on my PhD. I was like a brand new doctoral student, and I had an 18-month-old. And my plan had been to stay at home. My background was in education. And since the time I was 6 years old, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what I really, all my jobs were like being nannies and babysitters. Like I just loved caring for children. And so that was always my plan. But we moved to California where my family is, and my husband is an English professor, and we couldn't afford for me not to work. So my husband was like, you got to go to work. And I was like, well, that's not the plan. And he's like, yeah, well, the plan has to change. So, so I was like, well, if I'm going to work, I'm going to have to get a PhD real quick here for a second so that I can be a professor, so I can have hours to be home more. And so I started the PhD program at USC, and I had an 18-month-old, and I heard Dan Siegel speak. And I didn't know who Dan was. And he's obviously my co-author on these books. But when he laid out the science of interpersonal neurobiology and the science of integration, something clicked for me in a way. I had been a really frustrated grad student. I was like, I understand what you're saying to me, professor, about this research, but why? What's the mechanism? Like I wanted to know more, and no one could ever really answer those questions for me until I learned this science. And when I learned it, I was like, I have to go follow this guy. So I started studying with Dan. I started taking, even though I was a USC student, I took classes at UCLA to study with him. And then I was in his professional study group. And what was interesting is, so I have an 18-month-old, I hear Dan all of a sudden, and my focus in social work was child rearing theory. So I was already studying attachment science and child rearing theory and all of this. And So what happened was I was studying with Dan, and Dan was teaching how the science of integration, how the different parts of our brain get wired from experience and get functionally linked together, and how that leads to all these beautiful outcomes. And so I started thinking about, how can I, as a parent, from the very beginning, give my child experiences, and particularly relational experiences, that optimally build their development and how their brains get wired. And so all of these books have been written in the moment as I've raised 3 children. So, The Whole Brain Child was written after I went to Dan one day and I had told him that I had taught the hand model of flip your lid to my 4-year-old. And so, and Dan's kids were a little bit older at that time. And so I was walking through tantrums, and I was trying timeouts, and I was doing these things as a mom, while I was also learning about how the nervous system works and how the brain gets wired. And so I know it kind of sounds like I'm saying my kids were little, test lab children. And so I'm sure they don't appreciate, some of that, how that might get, interpreted. But really, these books came out of applying this cutting edge science about the brain and the nervous system and relationships in the trenches, in the tantrum moments, when they won't get out of the bathtub, when they won't get in the bathtub, all of that. And then now into my children's adolescence. And it's really remarkable because not only is it effective, but it feels good, and the outcomes are incredible as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you wrote the books you needed, which sounds pretty smart to me for a busy PhD student trying to work and be present with your children as well.
Yeah. And, all the, again, the main paradigm out there in terms of child rearing theory and mental health, which I'm trained in, and all these other things, is so heavily focused on behavior and behavior change, including even how we think about milestones and we think about development. And we're looking for behavioral kinds of things, like, are they walking? Are they talking? And those things are so important, and they're important markers, and they're really fun as parents too. But what was really missing was understanding what's happening behind the behavior in the mind of the child, and in the nervous system of the child, and in the stress response of the child, and how that brain is creating mental models for what to expect in the world. And so when I learned the science of attachment, I was really blown away that we're talking about 50 years of rigorous research all across the world. So this is across many, many cultures, that really says all of those things, parents, that you worry about. We worry we're spending not enough time with our children, or we worry we're spending too much time with them, or and fear-based parenting can so get the best of us. So our kid sleeps in the bed with us one night, and we're like, now they're never going to sleep on their own. And eventually, on our minds, our fear drives us to think, oh my gosh, they're going to live in a van down by the river and never, amount to anything. And you can get so caught up in this fear. But what this 50 years of science has told us very clearly is that there's really one thing that is the most important predictor for how well our children turn out on everything we measure them on. Now, that's a huge, sweeping statement to make. I mean, that is huge. And in psychology research, if we can predict something about 15%, we feel like we're pretty proud of ourselves. But we're talking about research that's like 85% predictive. And what it tells us is that as mammals, there's really one thing we need for us to have optimal development. And that is, let me just say kind of the punchline, and that's the best predictor for how we turn out is that we had secure attachment with at least one person. And so what that means is that, and again, this is a mammal instinct. If you're a little chimp in the jungle, you hear a scary noise or you get hurt, your attachment instinct makes you run to your attachment figure so that you can survive. And so this allows us to survive, get safe again. We're like, oh, good, they protected me, I'm okay. And then we can go back to learning and growing and all of that, because we know someone's going to be there to protect us and connect with us and take care of us. And when we don't get that kind of secure attachment, we have one of the more insecure styles of attachment, it can impact our development. But the research is so hopeful in that the best predictor for whether or not we can provide that kind of secure attachment to our kids is not whether or not we had it. Thank God, because about 40% of people don't have secure attachment with their own parents. But the research is clear that our history is not our destiny, that as parents, as long as we reflect and make sense of the kinds of experiences we had or didn't have with our parents that we needed, our brains begin to shift and we are able to start providing those kinds of experiences for our kids. And I'll just say one more thing, Rebecca, before you chime in, and that's that, this science is so powerful and it simplifies everything as a parent. It's really, we could talk about the 4 S's and how that's like my North Star for what to always do in every moment as a parent when I don't know what to do. And I'm not saying it's easy, but this is the key. This is really the one thing we ought to be the most focused on, and it can alleviate so much of our other worries. And so Dan and I rarely have ever given a talk, regardless of who our audience is, if it's parents or educators, or I do a lot of talks for businesses and companies sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I never give a talk without talking about this secure attachment and the 4 S's. It's applicable across everything because we're mammals. And so at the end of The Whole Brain Child, this is like a little insider story. At the end of The Whole Brain Child, which is the book we're most known for, in the conclusion, we wrote this huge long section about this science. And we're like, look, this is the most important thing you need to do, is to show up for your kids and to be present. And we talked about the 4 S's. And our editor at Random House was like, you have to take that whole section out. And we're like, why? This is the most important thing. And she's like, no, but the rest of The Whole Brain Child is so important. And you're basically saying everything I just said doesn't matter as much as what I'm saying now. And I know that's not what you're saying. So anyway, she basically was like, you've got too many rich things in here. A parent can't take it all. So she's like, take it out. That'll be another book down the road. And so that's the book that almost wanted to be written even back before The Whole Brain Child.
Wow, that's amazing. Because now I'm actually holding that, I guess, cutting room floor chapter, but it is now literally a physical book I'm holding in my hand. Yes. Your latest, The Power of Showing Up, How Parental Presence Shapes Who Our Kids Become and How Their Brains Get Wired.
I'm really proud of this book, Rebecca. Like I said, it's really the book I've been wanting to write from the beginning. And it's really what started my journey down this road of interpersonal neurobiology. And it's the foundation for all the other books and the conclusion for all the other books and the middle point of all. I mean, it's really everything. And I'm just really proud of it. It's like your kids. You would never say you have a favorite necessarily, but it might be one of my favorites. I have to say one of, because I still love Whole Brain so much, and I love No Drama so much. Those are such great ones. And of course I love the Yes Brain too, but it's my least favorite of the 4, honestly. I have to make a cut.
You have to pick favorites somewhere. So, what I love about the phrase showing up, right? Like I think of, even my own fears as a parent, and it's, this, am I doing this right? The multiple voices that are in our heads, and, whether it's a perfectionist voice comes in or a critic voice comes in, or like you're literally watching the meltdown happen. And, like, is there a problem? Is there not a problem? There seems to be almost our own insecurity of, am I able to be what this person needs? And I think how you talked about your history is not your destiny, something that's critical to my values in mothering is, honoring and respecting that there are a multitude of reasons in which I can acknowledge maybe my needs weren't met, related to anything from education into financial insecurity to divorce in my family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all have trauma histories, right? And so it's like, and then, you have your baby and you're holding this innocent child, and you can't create a bubble utopia for them, right? But you really want to do a very good job. And I often say things like, what are ways in which I can like break the chain, right? So when you talked about your history not being your destiny. And so because of that motivation, hence the power of the thoughts and self, awareness of, is this right or wrong, good or bad, da, da, da. And that it just generates this fear. It's almost like nothing is ever enough. And And here you are saying, hey, you know what's enough? 2 words, show up.
That's right.
And it's just like, it's just a relief. And so,
It's freeing.
that's what I want to kind of talk about is like, how can we start this conversation around like, why is showing up enough? And if you wanted to integrate the 4 S's, because I know that, like you said, that's the foundation. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think this is why I love this research so much. It's freeing and it's hopeful. And I think it gives us a lot of room to be the humans we are. Regardless of what, we want so much to be perfect and to, like you said, create that utopia. And part of that in our minds is we sort of create this expectation for ourselves that we are part of that utopia. And, the truth is that there's no way we can be perfect, and there's no way we can prevent our children from dealing with challenges and adversity and struggles and all of those things. And so, if as a parent we have an expectation that we can protect our children from hard things in the world, we're going to constantly live in states of feeling failure because we didn't protect them from, feeling disappointment or left out or whatever. And we're going to feel a lot of anxiety because the world's going to be bringing that. And what this research says that I think is so freeing is, number one, you don't have to be perfect. You can mess up all the time as long as you repair. And we can talk a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing it says is that what matters most is that we walk with our children through the struggle. So it's not about preventing them from having struggle. Of course, we want to protect them when it comes to, being safe and those kinds of things. But when our children deal with difficult emotions and difficult things, our job is to be present and walk with them through it, even in our own imperfect ways. And I think, when we talk about presence being the important piece here, the opposite of that is distraction and disconnection. And I think it's way more tempting and challenging now to be on our devices, I think now as parents, than it was when I first started, my parenting journey, which was before a lot of people had smart, everybody had smart, I had like a flip phone for emergencies, but, and I see, I don't want to vilify our devices because they can be really wonderful and useful and connecting, and it's how we use them that's important. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really challenging as parents. Historically, we had a lot of people helping us parent, and now we're doing it on our own, especially if you're a single parent. Mm-hmm. And it's just really challenging. We're so stretched. We're so overcommitted. We're so distracted on our devices. And really, so I guess let me say it this way. For those of us as parents who think we have to hyper parent and enrich our children's lives in every way and do everything for them and be everything for them and provide everything for them, the answer is you don't have to do all that. You just need to be present and show up. And then for those of us as parents who are distracted, preoccupied, stretched too thin, not caring for ourselves, our kids, the answer is the same. Like our kids are saying, I need you to be present. I need you to show up in this moment and give me yourself, and what your kids need most from you is you. And so let's start with the 4 S's. So what does showing up look like? What does that mean, like in the actual everyday trenches of parenting? And by the way, if you have young children, I'll give some examples of that, but I'll give some examples of adolescents. But if you have grown adult children, it's not too late. And in fact, the 4 S's and this idea of having someone show up for you is something we all need. So I try to do the 4 S's with my husband and my best friend and my mom and, all of these things. So it's applicable for relationships. So showing up, let's talk about the 4 S's. Mm-hmm. The first one is safe. Now, safe obviously means to protect our children from harm. We for sure want to do that. And this comes pretty naturally for most of us, making sure they're in their car seat, making sure they're not running into the street, taking them to the doctor when they need to, all of these things, keeping them safe. But the second part of this is a little bit more challenging to talk about. And the second part of this is to not be the source of fear or harm for our children. So, obviously this would be touching people where there's abuse or neglect. And this is so powerful when you think about attachment, because go back to the example of the chimp in the jungle who's running to their attachment figure to keep them safe and protect them. But what if the caregiver is the source of the terror or the source of the pain? Then it actually creates a biological paradox, because you have one circuit that says, go to your attachment figure to be safe. That's your biological instinct. But you also have a biological instinct that says, get the hell away from who is dangerous and what is dangerous. So it actually creates disorganization in the brain. So that's in like abuse and neglect kind of stuff. And if that's happening in your home, and it's actually far more common than people know, it's really important that you get help, because you actually, as soon as we start making changes, our children benefit right away. So that's that. But if that's not the case, there are ways that we violate this first S of safety. And the most common way we do that in typical homes is where we scream and yell and are unpredictable as parents. So, we get to our breaking point. I have absolutely done it, and I'm sure all of you listeners have as well. But we fly off the handle. We scream and yell. We act like a crazy person. My kids still laugh at me about what they now call the Yahtzee incident, because I got really mad. And my first when I start to lose my own regulation and I start getting into a more flooded state, my first place that I go to is super immature. And so like in this moment, I was like, I go to this sarcastic, immature person. And then I'm like, oh, it's so fun to have game night with you. I'm so glad we're spending quality time together. This is really fun, guys. Like, that's where I go first. And then I escalated and ended up throwing the dice across the room. And so that's just the Yahtzee incident. So, I was unpredictable in that moment. I did something I typically would never do. And I was really angry, and I didn't hurt anyone, but I was yelling and I was scary. And so, that's a way that that can happen. Also, if parents, whether they're married or not, yell at each other, demean each other, particularly when there's conflictual divorce, when parents, undermine each other and berate each other, all of those things can undermine a child's ability to feel safe. So those are ways that we can think about safety. How can I protect my child from harm and not be the source of fear or unpredictability? So the takeaway on this, though, and I'll just give away the very first, two strategies in the book. And the first one is first, do no harm. So if we find ourselves being really reactive in ways that are maybe violating that sense, it's really important that we talk to somebody and we get clear, because a lot of times, sometimes that's like, I haven't peed in 6 hours, I haven't slept well, and I'm starving, and you guys are driving me crazy because you're being really out of control or whatever. Sometimes it's just normal life. But other times we have unresolved stuff from our own histories that are part of that unpredictability and that reactivity. The second takeaway on that one is to repair. And so when we have Yahtzee moments, Yahtzee incidents, or we have, times as parents that we get reactive, the key is to repair with our children. And when we go to them and we say, I do not like how I handled that. I really wish I had handled that differently. I'm really sorry. I should have listened more. I should have not yelled. And when we go back and we help our child make sense of what happened by apologizing, it allows them to feel safe again, because they know that, that wasn't unusual. She made things right. And once we repair, it can actually be really beneficial for our children. Not only do we model for them how to do that, but they have an experience where there is a rupture and conflict and feelings of this doesn't feel good or right in the relationship. And then things get right again. So what that does is it kind of expands their capacity to tolerate conflict in relationships. So it actually makes them really more resilient in their own relationships. So we can stop being so hard on ourselves, Rebecca. We're like, I was a crazy person yesterday. I was actually resilience building, right? So we can be more gentle with ourselves. So that safe one is really, really important. Seen is the idea of knowing our children and seeing the mind behind the behavior. So the difference between being seen and not seen, and I know it's funny when I talk about safe, seen, soothed, and secure, which are the 4 S's. At first listen, people might say, okay, I guess that's what parents do. Like, it doesn't necessarily seem revolutionary. But when we really start looking at these, it's really the opposite of how so many of us were raised and how we so often respond. Like, the generation of children should be seen and not heard.
Mm-hmm.
And they meant seen physically, and not listened to, right? This is sort of the opposite of that. When I talk about seen, when Dan and I talk about this, we're not talking about seeing with our eyes. We're talking about seeing with our minds. And so what we're doing is our child then has the experience of feeling felt, being known, being understood. And I think the way we often can violate this is, first of all, we want our child to be something other than they're not. And that's on the surface easy to understand. Like, I would really rather my kid be an athlete than a chess champion, or I really want my kid to go to Stanford. And so I'm going to drive them really hard to be, really focused on grades and academics. But really, maybe your child is more of a meanderer, tinkerer, experimenter, innovator, creative person who isn't interested in that path, right? So that's on the surface level. But other ways that we do this is by ignoring their internal experience. So we say, your child's acting out, and if you see with your mind, you go, oh my gosh, my kid's really embarrassed right now. Or I'll give an example. My son was 4 or so and was refusing to get out of the bathtub, tantruming. So in that moment, one of the ways, by the way, that we also can help them feel safe is by having predictable boundaries. So everything I'm talking about is not about being permissive. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is not about letting kids do what they want to do. So my little son, JP, is screaming, yelling, doesn't want to get out of the bathtub. And so I say, it's time to get out. And I'll either help you out or you can get out by yourself. So he doesn't get out. So I say to him, you're so sad about bath time being over. You're really, really mad that I'm going to have you get out of the tub now. So that's seen. So seen is very simple. It's really looking at first letting our kids be who they are. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we don't push them sometimes or we don't challenge them. If we want to, I'm not saying if your child wants to be a lazy person who never helps with family chores, that's okay. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about their who they are, not what they want to do. And the second piece of this here then is just really looking at what their internal experience is. And the science is really clear that if we have those kinds of reflective dialogues and we ask them, is this what you are feeling? Or I'm wondering if you're feeling really disappointed. Or we say to them, you're so sad that you don't get to stay up later with the big boys and you have to go to bed. And that's really sad for you. When we say those kinds of things, we're actually exercising the circuitry in their brain that allows them to understand themselves and understand others, which is a word mind sight that we've used. Mm-hmm. Seeing their own mind and seeing the minds of others. So seen is really just about understanding their internal experience and making sense of it. Then the third one, it leads us to this idea of soothed. And so soothed is really helping our child. It's just helping them calm down and comforting them and soothing them so that they can move from a really reactive state that can feel really scary and chaotic with big feelings back to their regulated state. And when we give them practice doing that, which we would call co-regulation, so JP's freaking out in the bathtub. He's screaming and yelling. As I'm pulling him out, I'm saying, you're so disappointed. You're really mad. Bath time is over. And the soothed part is I say to him, if you need to cry for a little while or yell for a little bit, you can do that. I'm right here with you while you do that. So I'm still enforcing the boundary. Mm-hmm. I'm saying no to the behavior, but I'm saying yes to his internal experience. And then I'm saying, I'm right here with you. I will help you calm down. I will help you. So it's really like we want to be communicating to our kids, even in the midst of difficult behavior. You're safe. I'm with you. I'm going to help you. We'll figure this out together. So this is where, hugging our child, rubbing their back, sometimes just sitting quietly with them and being present to say, I'm going to help you calm down. And with little kids, it can work really, you can say, what is it you need right now? Do you need a hug? Sometimes they'll say yes. With teenagers, it's a little more tricky. Soothed for teenagers may just more be listening and doing little acts of kindness, like getting them, some ice water while they're crying and upset about something, or our teenagers need to be touched and held as not as much, but as often as all of us do. So going over and rubbing a back and just listening. How can I help? What is it you need right now? Asking them how you can soothe them. So these three S's, helping them feel safe, seeing them, soothing them, helping them calm down, all of these lead to the fourth S, which is secure. And secure is not the idea that, oh, I just feel secure about myself. Mm-hmm. Secure is what happens, and we actually would call it secure attachment if we were talking in our scientific terms. But secure happens when you have enough predictable and repeated experiences of feeling safe, seen, and soothed. Our brains then wire to expect that if we have a need, someone will see it and show up for us. That someone will help us feel safe, seen, and soothed. And so the brain develops this mental model of expectation. And so the child then believes, if I've got a need, someone's going to show up for me. Someone's got me. And then what's great about that is then they start expecting that in their relationships, in their friendships, in their romantic partners. And their brain wires, and particularly it's that middle prefrontal cortex that gets wired so that they can do it for themselves. They can help themselves be safe. They can soothe themselves. They can calm themselves down and soothe themselves. And then they can be that kind of friend and parent down the road. And I think this is so exciting because, I have a kid who's in college, and, as I've done this 4S's work with my children, there are times my teenagers have done things where they were not making good decisions to keep themselves safe. And so instead of screaming and yelling, once I'm calm, then I can sit down with them and I can say, you made a decision that didn't keep your own safety in mind. And my number one job is to keep you safe. So because of that, the rains are coming in and I will keep you safe. And so here's how things are going to change. And so it's not a punitive screaming and yelling, I'm doing this to you and here's how you're in trouble. It's here's how I'm going to ensure that you're safe. So it's really something that kind of guides me as a parent. There are lots of times as a parent, I don't know what to do exactly, or I don't know what to say exactly. But if I go, okay, I'm going to help my child feel safe, seen, and soothed, that's my North Star. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. It's always the right thing to do. You can also address the behavior and all of those things as well, but putting the relationship first and putting the particular behavior or thing that needs to be addressed as the secondary thing is so much more effective as well, because once we help our child's brain get more regulated and we soothe them, their brain is much more receptive to learning and learning how to do things better the next time.
So if I may reflect, what I'm learning from this is that it is, like, how do we know we're doing enough as a parent? We want to have this mindset of showing up and showing up consistently. The how of showing up, it really is a practice, right? So it's learning about the 4 S's and it's practicing them. And when you are practicing, meaning you're human and making mistakes, right? But you're practicing safe, seen, and soothed, right? The way the brain learns and grows is by consistent exposures, right? To a certain type of scenario in life.
Right.
Lots of repetition. So the more we're practicing safe, seen, and soothed, we are helping our children at various ages, even adult children, right, feel secure.
Yep.
And in that feeling of security is how they will be able to self-regulate life's normal ups and downs down the road, build resilience, and, not to have a pain-free life or an uneventful life, but to be more solid in that feeling of this is scary and this is hard, but I think I have what it takes to handle this, which is really a life skill, right? It's how you might be able to better manage anxiety or possibly avoid or better manage depression, so that it's connected to that level. Did I get that correct?
That was so beautiful, Rebecca. You did that so beautifully. You should just come on the road with me. That was awesome.
Oh, please take me.
I think, and just because, we're just human, I'm the book just came out yesterday and my brain's a little tired. And so you just said that so succinctly. And so as you're saying that, I'm saying, oh, took so long to say that. So
Oh, no, it's all the detail though.
beautiful.
All the detail you gave helped me. And you know what helped by explaining that too is I was replaying. I think it was Monday night. So it was literally like 2 nights ago. I was replaying this event and sort of checking in on how I was doing. And I was wondering if I could share that reflection with you on it for a second.
But can I pause you for
Yeah,
just one second?
definitely.
Because something just hit me, and I was driving in the car with one of my teenage boys yesterday, and he's like, "Well, how's the day been going? Has it been a fun day?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, it's funny. It's like, is this really revolutionary for people? Is this different? And he and I were talking about how, I mean, really, it's so common for us as parents, and I've done it too. But if a kid is crying and upset about something or scared about something, and they're upset, it's so common in our culture for us to do the opposite of the 4 S's. And so we do the opposite of safe, and we start yelling at our kid, and then we don't. We do the opposite of seeing them. We tell them not to feel, and then we don't help them. So we do the opposite of those. We're like, why are you so upset about that? That's so not a big deal. Why are you freaking out? Like, if you're going to cry like that, go to your room. And, that's not, if we say things like that and we do it every now and then and, whatever, that's fine. We're not damaging our children when we do that. But it really is the opposite of the 4 S's, because our child learns from that experience. My parent didn't respond really well when I had big feelings. They didn't want to hear it. And if we tell our kids enough times, I don't want to hear it, they internalize that. And guess what? That's going to come back to bite us, especially when they're teenagers, when we want them to come to us. And we're like, and then the child also says, gosh, when I have these hard things that happen, I'm kind of on my own. And so now I feel even more worried or more upset because no one will help me. So that's such a benign thing for us to say on the surface, is to be like, why are you freaking out about that? Or why are you being such a baby? Or, if you're going to cry, go to your room and cry. It's really kind of the opposite of what those first 3 S's are. And so anyway, those are, again, moments to repair, but it is very different from how most of us grew up. And it's a very different way to think about just saying, okay, my job right now is to just really be present, to hear my child and to support them. So what happened for you? What's your story?
Just tipping into the revolutionary aspect, what I see as a reader and as a parent is that it's really helping to keep us focused on our collective well-being. How our brain thinks, black and white, good and bad,
Right.
Yes and no, right? And I think it's helping us to stay integrated and that there's a common humanity and a collective well-being, because in my story, I can't explain my interaction with my child without having an insight into what was going on with me and where my eyes are now open. So, I'm happy to share that. So this background, this is my older daughter who is 7. And as soon as you said big feelings, I was like, oh, okay, we can relate, because this is how we would categorize our older daughter.
Yes.
Even as she was putting phrases together. So this is preschool, 3 years old. Sweetest girl, love, connected family, love. And one day she asked us, Mommy and Daddy, are you happy with me? And we're like, yeah, honey, we love you. I mean, and at the time we thought it was cute. Like, she wants to know she's loved. And, and it was just a thing. But what made me remember that was when, even in preschool, she would, like, if she wasn't chosen for something she wanted to do, she was in a Montessori preschool. So if she leaned over to her friend, tried to open up her yogurt and the friend didn't want that, that's like, independence. So,
Right.
she'd get a little, Audrey, stick to your personal space, et cetera. But her feelings would get hurt. She would run away, and she would, the teachers would explain what they were seeing, that she would stay in the room or go right outside the room, like by the lunch boxes. But they always kind of knew that she was safe and like wanted to give her a moment, and then they would kind of reintegrate her back into the classroom. But, there was a time, it was just kind of like, developmentally, like, let's watch this. And when she adjusted to kindergarten, there was, early on in kindergarten, again, adjustment periods, but there was an incident where 3 kids are playing blocks. And has this whole pretend thing going where she's an ice cream truck, and they're playing together and sharing these blocks, and two of them change their mind, decide to play cops and robbers. They kick over her blocks and she loses it, like anger, So, and again, so, the teacher explains, like, it was basically I had to help her leave the room to get her emotions. And we got her involved in a friendship group at school, made it through, kindergarten, watching things, first grade, a couple of similar experiences, sometimes would get physical, like she would push another friend. And so when this started happening again, and really what I think was we would see things at home and it's like, well, this isn't happening at school because we would know about it. And now as we're learning more and more, we're like, oh, this has been this like kind of flame, which we have, I do think we're doing what we can, but, to get this whole idea, the story. So when earlier this year, I said, well, can you draw me a picture of how you felt and what happened? And she grabbed a white piece of paper, a Sharpie. She drew two kids. She drew like hair, like fire was coming out of the brain. And hers was like, 5 inches, and the other friend's was like 1 inch. And she said, like, my fire's bigger than hers, and so I'm looking at this and I was like, I can clearly see someone who is able to attack me. Like, I'm feeling this way. And like, there's almost like, I know cognitively it's not right to push this friend, but I can't help it. Like, this is what I have to do. And justifying it to mom, like, my fire's bigger. And so we did end up starting with some individual therapy. And then through that, we got involved with therapy for parents. So we can help because we're with her all the time and she's doing another friendship group. And so, definitely I feel a big relief for just seeing what is there. And, luckily we have the privilege to have those resources to be able to help her now, and help us, because this is the key, how it relates to this recent experience. From time to time, I'll ask my kids, well, how can I be a better mommy? And and really kind of both agreed. And I was like, but they said, it would be better if you didn't yell.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting that you brought up yelling, because I was like, do I yell? It's like, so it was kind of a shame. And then a curiosity is like, I don't think I yell. It's like, as you can tell, I'm excited. I'm passionate. My voice carries. People always tell me inside voice, but I'm like, but they're picking this up as yelling. And long story short, as I reflect on my last year, I literally had physical manifestations of anxiety because I broke out into 5 different rashes, went to the doctor. The doctor grabbed my cell phone and said, these things are killing people. I think this is anxiety. Go to a dermatologist. I mean, it took me 2 rounds of prednisone, topical creams, all this skin stuff. And still I'm like, I need to get back to yoga. And what am I doing? Not getting back to yoga. And so I kept saying, like, I can handle it. I can handle it. And I wouldn't really accept that it was it was just how anxiety was showing up for me. Some difficulty sleeping, some gotta do. Like my panic button could easily be pressed. And so the way that I got had a great holiday with my family, but I got a nice solo trip, and I actually did a yoga retreat. And I can honestly tell you that sort of back to meditation, the practice of yoga, coming up with a mantra, which by the way is live with ease. And I literally every day am practicing that. And I said, okay, you're going to practice this. You're going to practice not yelling. So this is after that trip. And I'm bringing Audrey back from ballet, and she's in the back seat. She spills a little bit of her water, and it's, chronologically, she's 7. And in my mind, she's having this meltdown as if she's like 4. As my clothes are ruined, my coat is ruined. And I said, okay, you're not going to yell. You're not going to yell. I was like, you're going to listen. But what I did, I think I messed up on the scene part, because what I did is I was like, well, honey, it's not ruined because we can wash your clothes, or we could dry your coat, or we could get another coat. And in hearing you describe scene, I was like, I think because I didn't say, oh, are you cold? It's cold outside. Like, you must be cold and wet. I bet you that doesn't feel good. Like, and I did not do that at all. But like, as I was listening to you, so thank you for the detail, I was like, I probably could have done better there. But let me highlight the good really quickly. I was fully committed to like not yelling. And so I started my own breath. I just regulated my breathing,
Good for
and
you.
she kept going on and on. And so this part of me is like, oh my God, if she doesn't shut up about being cold in her coat, I'm going to lose it. And I was like, no, Rebecca, breathe in and out. And so I kind of started in my own like worry about what am I going to do? And I was like, let's listen to music. And she's like, no music. And normally music, like we could play the Cats musical. We could play, they even listen to Rent, like they love
Awesome.
Seasons of Love. And like, she didn't want that. And I was like, oh, I just got to get home. And I'm breathing. I'm like, but you're not going to yell. You're going to gently like that. I guess soothe. I was trying to soothe and like, I'll be here with you. But I was also kind of really trying to watch my responses. This is something they had asked for. It's something that I was like, I don't think I'm yelling, but I'm going to try really hard because they're reading it as. So I ended up calling my husband and I said, hey, all is well. We're on our way home. Can you just talk to us? And he's like, yep. And he's like, I'm making dinner. And so we got my husband's voice in the car. And I think it was because, again, I wasn't doing scene. Maybe there was some distracting going on, but also some soothing. He was describing what he was making for dinner. He was describing that Isla was watching a little bit of TV. And I quietly started crying. And I was like, but that's okay because you're crying, you're not yelling. This is okay. You're going to get home. And so I didn't want her to know I was crying. Not that crying is bad, but I didn't want her to feel shame like she was making me cry. So I was just breathing, letting the tears come. Dad's distracting her. And then she goes, oh, well, what is Isla watching again? It was like Zootopia or something. And I was like, Audrey, I was like, would you like mommy's phone? I know the way to get home. Would you like to put something on it? Yeah, I'd love that. Okay, Dad, we got to go. She put on her little YouTube, whatever. And we got home and walked in. No meltdown. Clothes got dried. I didn't yell. And I was like, oh, I think I did it. And in hindsight, I do think I was having a short fuse. I would get to voice raising too quickly. And it was being read as yelling. And I don't want to be that kind of parent, like at all. So what would you say to that lived experience?
No, and I thank you for sharing that story. And it's such a common moment we can all just relate to. It's like an everyday moment. Something like that can happen every single day in every single home. So I have several things I want to say, and I sort of want to work backwards because the first thing is amazing that you set an intention and it's for sure, if I just raise my voice like this, I'm like, you guys, you left your stuff everywhere. I just picked up and your stuff is everywhere. Like if I say like that, they'll be like, why are you yelling? So that they, kids sometimes use that word in a way that's different from the kind of yelling we might define it as. And I think, this idea of being present and soothing our children and all of those things, I am not prescribing that we are inauthentic, shoving our feelings down, pretending things are okay when they're not. Like kids are the best BS sniffers. And so if you're like, no, mommy's not mad, and you're like got steam coming out of your ears, like that's not good because kids either have to, if we're trying to pretend that we're not upset, our kids will either be like, either she's lying to me that she's not upset, so she's a liar, or I can't trust my instincts to read. Like I can't trust my own radar because I thought she was mad and she's saying not. And usually kids have to trust their caregivers in order to survive. That's like a deep brain thing. So they start not trusting themselves. So I think when, part of sometimes being present in the moment and trying to regulate ourselves is doing more like the name it to tame it thing that we talk about in Whole Brain Child, where we actually name accurately the emotion that's happening, and it starts regulating and turning down our nervous system arousal. And that's for our kids, but also for ourselves. So, there have been times in the car when I've got multiple kids in there and everyone's upset to say, you're mad and you're mad and you're mad and I'm mad. And if we talk to each other, we might not be kind. So we're not going to talk right now. We're going to only listen to music right now. And that's seen. And in a way, that's really like, we're all mad, and that's just the truth right now, and then I'd say like, I'm going to take some deep breaths and we're going to listen to music, and I would turn the music up. And once I could get to a place where I could start making up silly words to go with the thing, then everybody would laughing, that kind of thing. Or there were times in the car when my kids would be dysregulated and I would start telling a story, just making up a story about two birds that were in the tree. And, I just make up weird, whatever came to my mind. And that would help regulate them and me, because when you tell a story, you're actually engaging your left hemisphere, which helps balance out the reactivity of the big emotional tsunami of the right. So those are a couple of strategies in the moment. And I think, one thing for me, Rebecca, that instead of like saying, I just want to challenge you to try something and you can give me a report about how it works. But for me, if I say to myself, like, don't yell today, that doesn't work very well for me. What works better for me is to talk about not what I'm not going to, is to not talk about what I'm not going to do, but rather to set an intention for what I am going to do. And I hear you saying that too. But what has helped me so much in terms of regulating my children and myself is a couple of things. One is to think of my main job, and we talk about this in The Power of Showing Up, as being a safe haven. So if you even like reach your arms out almost to like create a circle, like you're creating a safe harbor, like a little area for your child's out in the world, their little sailboat, and the world beats them up and storms come. We have all this stuff about the red zone and the green zone and the blue zone. And I bet your daughter would really love when she talks about her fire being bigger than other kids. What she's probably saying is, I go to my red zone really quickly. And my green zone isn't quite as big. Like my window of tolerance is not quite as big as my friend. So she might really benefit from having that language about understanding her own red zone, or she could call it her fire zone. But what I'm thinking about is when my child's dial is like at a 9 or a 10 and the emotion is huge, they're just, really reactive. They're unreasonable. They attack me in unfair ways, or whatever it is, that if I imagine that their volume dial is turned up way too high, and my job is to turn their volume dial down. So what I can do then is I can easily go to, instead of being like, my kid's being an ass right now, or my kid is purposefully trying to upset me, which may or may not be true, but a lot of times we ascribe meaning that isn't there. Your child's brain is still just dysregulated in the moment. But if I, instead of jumping to all those places, I go, oh, my child is in distress. It's so much easier to show up and comfort and see our kids when they're physically hurt. But when they're emotionally in distress, it's much harder for us. And so if in my mind I go, oh, my kid's raging, they're screaming, yelling, angry, disrespectful. In my mind, if I go, oh, they're in distress, and I'm going to respond as if they were physically hurt. They're in emotional distress. And my job is to slowly turn that dial down. I can access empathy so much easier. And I'm like, oh, you're so mad right now. You're so upset. So in that moment, you moved to the soothed and the problem solving, which is great. I mean, that's one of the ways we help our kids feel safe, seen, and soothed, is by doing that. And I really think if you had just had one tiny thing to say, oh, that's really upsetting to you. I mean, just even that, something generic, be like, oh, bummer, that's really upsetting when our clothes get wet. Something like that, right? Just this one tiny little piece. Then that might have been helpful. But here's the other thing, is that we might 4S the crap out of our kid, and they might still totally be raging with tantrum because their nervous system is in a dysregulated state. But still, at the end of that interaction, their brain's like, oh, that person showed up for me and I can count on them. And, so there's still benefits. And so our child may be raging, but we stay present. We communicate to them, I can handle your big feelings even when you can't. You will not lose my love, right? So we show all of these things. And then, one other thing that really helps me in terms of staying calm is you all can do this as you're listening. If you put a hand over your chest, like on your chest near your heart, and then put a hand on your belly, just right below your belly button, and kind of relax, but just feel the pressure of your hand in those two places and take a breath or two. And then you can actually switch your hands. Most people prefer right hand on top and left hand on the abdomen, but there's some variation, but when you do that and you put your hands there and you take a breath, it actually helps regulate your nervous system. And it works very quickly. So, and the benefit of that too is that if I start to do that, my kids also know that I'm trying to calm myself down and that they better watch out because my emotions are big. So it's almost like a harbinger of doom if they don't pull it in. So
oh, mom's got her hand on her chest. Breathe,
exactly.
Mom, breathe.
Exactly. But I want to say a couple other things about your daughter.
Sure.
One is, they're just so incredible. And one of the things I often find myself saying to parents more than anything is, our children's brains are amazing. And, we can call it the social engagement network, or we can call it the mirror neuron system. We can call it lots of different things if we're being technical. But, one of the things Dan calls it is the sponge network. And it's the idea that our children really mirror our states. Mm-hmm. And so, I just had a conversation with a mom last week. Her daughter is so anxious that it's debilitating. And the mom's anxiety is really intense. She's anxious that her child is anxious, but she also brings a lot of anxiety to it. And we all understand that. But what I ended up saying to this mom is, your child's state of chaos and anxiety is a direct reflection of how much anxiety and chaos you are bringing to the moment. And if you can communicate to your child instead of joining them in the chaos, this will be okay. I will know how to help you with this, or this is really hard, but we can make it through. I'm with you. And if we can communicate that idea that you're okay, you're going to be okay, I'm with you in this, we'll figure it out together, it can so downregulate that anxiety. And so, if your daughter's going to these big emotion places and you can regulate yourself to be like, oh, that's so hard when our things get wet. That's upsetting, isn't it? And things dry really quickly and I will help you. And then if she continues to tantrum, you go, I know, baby, you're so upset. I'm right here with you. And that's it. You don't even have to engage in anything else. You just are present. And then one other thing I'll say, usually, and this is more the clinical lens here, usually when kids have really big feelings like that, we always want to peel back the layers to figure out what's that about. And part of it is often temperament, right? She came out that way with big feelings, and she's got a mom who has a lot of great energy, and she probably, you have some of that probably too. Another piece of that is something that's so important. And you jogged my memory to say this when you said, when she had the tantrum, it was like she was like a 4. She was acting like she was 4. And the truth is that kids who are really bright, and my guess is she was verbal very kind of early, and she's really bright and super perceptive and sensitive to a lot of information in the world, which is something that's wonderful for her. So when kids are really bright, first of all, we often expect them to be more emotionally mature than they actually are because they're so amazingly insightful and perceptive and verbal that we expect too much from them. But the second thing is that what we often see is something called asynchronous development, which means that cognitively and verbally, she may be faster than her peers. Like, so her cognitive fire might be taller than her friend too. But that emotionally, in terms of her social and emotional development and regulation, she may not be at that same high level. She may actually even be lagging a little bit in that. And that's just waiting for development to unfold. So what that means is, she might, because she thinks faster than her emotional system can. So she's got like a really good gas pedal, but her emotional brakes aren't in sync with how fast her gas pedal is. So that is just waiting for development to unfold, using opportunities to build skills for her and experiment with her. Like, what helps you calm down when you have big feelings? Let's come up with a toolbox. And we've got lots of strategies in the books for how to do that. But I think part of that is that when she's acting like a 4-year-old, she needs you to be a mom to a 4-year-old. She needs you to respond to where she is emotionally and to, when she was 4 and she might be having a tantrum, or when she was 6 months and she was screaming and crying because she just had a shot or whatever, you would pick her up and be like, oh, that hurt, didn't it? I'm right here. And you would hug her and pat her and hold her and rock her. She needs those kinds of things now, maybe not rocking, although, still works for much older kids, too. But I think really in those moments, she needs you to be the mom who is calming down the 4-year-old. And so that's just where she is right in that moment. And the more you soothe her and the more you give her experiences to where you help her calm down, or you're just present with her while she has a hard time calming down, the more reps her brain gets for going from a dysregulated state back into a regulated state. So this does not make her spoiled or indulged or fragile. In fact, the science says the opposite, which is that when kids have difficulty regulating and parents co-regulate or someone helps them, their brain gets practice doing that. And so they're much better at doing it for themselves. So when we have kids that are reactive like that, I really just am like, soothe the crap out of them. And that will actually build their brain for their capacity to do it for themselves.
Yeah, that was so helpful. I really appreciate it. I was feverishly taking notes and shaking my head and, an acknowledgement. And it really makes me feel a bit at ease. And, and I did want to share it, with respect to just how real the experiences are, and also making a connection because we also have our own self monitors, right, where we need to do like less judging and more kind of observing and self compassion on how we're doing, right? But it's like when we have these difficulties that can absolutely weave into, remembering to drink enough water or eat or getting good sleep, or, you can feel exhausted where, we know scientifically a 20 or 30-minute walk or, whatever you like to do for movement can be really energizing and good for you if you're in a state of feeling overwhelmed and dysregulated. That is going to feed into how you parent, and those parenting mistakes are going to feed into the dysregulation. So there's absolutely this integration, right, in between how we care for, enhance our own well-being, and like you mentioned with the mirror neurons, what you're showing up with, right? Not to shame and blame, but to acknowledge, like scientifically, what you're showing up with around your children is being learned. And
That's
so if we could practice,
that's
the
we
four
have to,
S's and the power of showing up, we're going to do a better job.
well, and I think you made such an important point there, and that is that, we have to monitor our own volume dial, right? And if we're not taking care of ourselves, it's going to be much harder to do, right? Our volume dial is going to be really wiggly and it can fly up really high very easily. And I think, what we need to think about then, because, this idea of, look, no matter what the moment is, come in with the 4 S's, right? Show up for your kid, be present. And when you make mistakes, repair with them. That's really the whole everything. Okay. But that's simple, but it is not always easy to do. And particularly if you have your own unresolved trauma or you haven't done a full making sense of, your past. And parenting is really a constant invitation to do our own work and to, reflect and to make sense of ourselves as well. But, it's not easy to do. So we really have to, if we're going to do this, we have to give ourselves, we have to help ourselves with the 4 S's. We have to, really take care of ourselves and help ourselves feel safe, seen, and soothed, and make sure we have other people. We can do it for ourselves, but we also want other people who will show up for us. You need someone in your life. It may not be your co-parent. It may be your best friend or your sibling, or maybe your own parent still, or parents in a parenting group, or whatever it is. And that's, one of the best things about a therapist is the therapist is the 4S guru, right? That's the therapist's job. And really the therapist becomes the attachment figure or the safe haven, so that you can sort of explore things. But I think that, we really need people who show up for us so that we have the capacity to do this. And again, what's so beautiful about this research is, we're going to have really bad days. And, especially when we have really difficult things happen, it's really beautiful to see, about 3 years ago, my dad passed away unexpectedly. And, it was very traumatic for me. And he was only 64. And so it was really devastating. It was right around Christmas. And,
wow.
My boys would have been 10, 13, and 16 at the time. And they were so amazing. They were like they totally showed up for me, not in a way where like they had to be my therapist or anything inappropriate like that. But I was like, dang, like I've wired enough into these kids that they know how to do that for somebody, you know, and that made me feel so much more reassured when I was taking my son to college for him to be on his own, to be like, he knows how to most of the time do these 4 S's for himself because I'm not here, you know, and he's going to find friends that do that for him. And so we can make a lot of mistakes, but we know we're laying the groundwork for the adult they're becoming. And that's why, again, the relationship with them is so powerful. And when we can really let them know, look, I've got your back. I'm here for you. I'll show up for you. That's just so powerful.
And, you know, and how we're talking about this, I feel the need to kind of circle back to a better understanding of where we're at culturally, right? So you mentioned before we had this sort of 24/7 tech culture and where our phones are, you know, we've got a computer in our purse or in our pocket, and just the societal demands of productivity and what it means for social value, very realistically actual financial income that helps keep a family afloat.
Yeah.
And at the same time, looking at ways I think our culture needs to improve and get better, but maybe better work boundaries, better email boundaries, and we should be looking at that. But when we stop and look at the immediate action, and you know, if you have ideas, I'm all ears. But you know, just the other morning, this was probably Tuesday morning, and coming back from the yoga retreat, I was like, I want to let myself rise out of bed when I feel like rising, and it happened to be around like 5:30, and I had gotten enough sleep. And so I lit some candles and I played calming music, and I had, you know, gone up a level, and I hear footsteps, and, you know, I was just about, you know, making my coffee. I was going to enjoy the morning, but yes, I was going to get into email, you know, in a little bit, but you know, this was me slowing down. And, you know, I would say before I'm more like hem and haw and almost that really unproductive laying in bed and checking social media, like total waste of time. I'm like, how about we get up and ease into some quiet? And, I hear the footsteps, and this is my younger daughter. And she said, you know, it's okay, mommy. I'll just lay on the couch so you can get your work done. And oh my God, my heart sank. And I just looked at her. I said, come here, honey. I said, look, you know, I gave her a big hug, and I said, nothing is more important to me than helping you have a calm sleep. I was like, let's go lay down. And, you know, and we went and we laid and cuddled, and it took maybe 10 minutes, and she was back asleep, and she got the rest of the sleep that she needed. But that I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't know if a previous version of me, right, when I was just deeper in how my anxiety was showing up and not facing it, like, I don't know if I would have said that. I think I might have said like, she ruined my 2 hours in the morning.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to be that mom. And so it's that, yeah, I would love to know your sort of, you know, thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. And, you know, at some point you have to open your computer and you do have to get your work done. And so this is not, you know, this is not to say we should never be on our devices. I have some really, I have so many thoughts about this. I mean, one is, first of all, no judgment, because I saw this dad. I read an article about this, but I saw this dad. I was driving somewhere. I can't remember where I was going. Oh, I was going to record a podcast at someone's house. And there was a dad on the corner of a really, really busy intersection, like coming off the freeway, kind of a busy intersection. And he had 2 dogs and 2 kids. And the kids looked about like 4 and 6. They were little. And, the dad was holding both dogs, and the kids were standing there. And I was kind of worried, like he wasn't holding the kids' hands, or the little one especially. I was worried the kid was going to run out in the street. So I was like watching hyper vigilantly. But the dad was looking at his phone, and, you know, they're standing waiting for the light to change for them to cross the street. So the dad was looking at his phone. So the little 4-year-old boy keeps pulling on the dad's leg over and over and looking up at him and saying something. And the dad's just on his phone. And, you know, again, no judgment, because maybe that dad like built a birdhouse with, you know, wood they, you know, grew in the backyard and composted, and, you know, went and fed the homeless all morning. Like, you know what I mean? Like maybe this dad's like super dad, but his wife was like texting and saying, I can't find my rental car or something, you know? So I'm not saying this dad was like totally checked out, not interested. So we just don't know the context. So we can't judge.
Right.
But the kid started tugging on the guy's pants, And you could see the dad kind of getting frustrated and said something to his kid. Then the kid started hitting his dad on the leg to amplify to get his dad's attention, right?
Yeah.
So then the dad yelled at him, and then the kid started crying, and the light changed. So the dad grabbed the kid's arm and yanked him across the street. And I thought, okay, how would that have gone differently if dad had responded to the bid for attention differently from the very beginning, right? And I do worry, I think about the difference it is for our young children, particularly when you have a parent. I rarely see a parent pushing a stroller where they are not looking at their phone.
Mm-hmm.
I rarely see it. Rarely. And I think about that. And again, maybe they've had wonderful interaction all morning with the child. So again, I don't know the context, but I think about that one slice of moment in time and what it's like if you're walking down the street, the child's in the stroller facing away from you even, but you're not on your device. And as you're walking, you're saying, wow, look at that big truck. Did you see those big wheels? And you're having this really vocabulary rich moment. Your kid's swimming in these, curiosity and naming things in the world versus a parent who's flipping through their Instagram feed. And what a different experience that kid is, even without looking at the parent's face. And, there's this really famous psychology experiment called the still face experiment, where basically you have a baby and the parent is given the parent's interacting with the baby. And then the parent's given a cue to just make their face go completely still and not respond at all to the baby.
Wow.
And within seconds, the baby starts trying to get a response from the parent. They start making noises or pointing at things. And when the parent doesn't respond like they typically would, where the parent looks to what the baby's pointing or, raises their eyebrows and makes a face back at the baby, but the parent just stays completely like non-responsive in their facial expression, the baby within seconds becomes really dysregulated, starts kicking and screaming and getting really upset. And I sort of think about these devices as like modern day still face experiments. We're looking at our devices and we're not responding to the micro interactions. Now, we can't do that all the time, but I think it's really important for us to not have our phones at the dinner table,
Mm-hmm.
not have our phones out in the car as much as possible. My kids are teenagers now, and we don't have phones out in the car unless we're on a road trip, because we're either quiet looking out the window, we're talking to each other, or we're listening to music together. I'm not saying when my kids were little, I might have passed them a phone when they were having a meltdown just to get home, so I didn't lose my mind. And that's probably less harmful than screaming and yelling at your kids. So that might have been a good call in the moment. But I also think that we do need to set limits for ourselves just as much as we set limits for our kids. And I don't know where I heard this. I wish I could give credit to whoever said this, but I love this idea. And that is that when you're with your children, try not to be on your, so when you need to use your device, interact with them around it to say, hey, I need to call dad to let him know we'll be home in a few minutes and check with him about what we need at the store. Or, hey, I don't remember how to get there. Let me pull up my directions. And so we're basically kind of narrating the purpose of our device and that we're using it for a specific reason, not just to distract ourselves. So I'll say two more things. One is,
Mm-hmm.
I am a huge fan of a book that's coming out February 2020 called The New Adolescence, and it's by Christine Carter. It has a wonderful, really practical sort of checklist for where phones should and shouldn't be. She says phones should never go into the bathroom with our children. Like most phones have fecal matter on them because they get taken into the bathroom. Just really, it's better for our kids to be in there thinking or having a moment for, to be bored or whatever. So she has these really practical suggestions. So that's really good. I also just read an amazing book called Wildhood about the adolescent period by Bowers and Horowitz Natterson. And Wildhood is about animals and their adolescent period. But they also talk about how social status seeking that's so natural to us as living creatures, how that gets amplified on our devices. Just really, really helpful stuff. I'll tell one final story about this that I think is really a wake-up call for all of us. So I was giving a talk at UCLA right when the Yes Brain came out, and I had a mom who stood in line to ask me a question, and she said, hey, I'm worried that my child is already addicted to screens. And I said, well, how old is your child? She said she's 18 months. And the conversation continued, and she basically said, well, if I take it away from her, she screams. And so I think she's addicted, and I just, I don't want her to be upset. So I give her the screen. And so we started talking about boundaries. If your child screamed, if you took away, if your child was holding, dishwashing soap and she was about to drink it, you would take it away. Like,
right.
It's okay to set boundaries, and it's okay if she screams and yells and you comfort her, and that's good,
Right.
But then she said, well, I think I'm on my device too much. And I said, okay, who is her primary caregiver? And she said, well, I am. I stay at home. I'm not working. And so I'm with her all day. So I'm just on my device a lot. And I said, okay, if you imagined you had a nanny and your nanny was on her device as much as you're on yours during the caregiving hours of the day, during her job of caring for your child, how would you feel about that? And she said, I would fire her instantly.
So she fires herself.
Yeah. And she said, oh my gosh, like it was sort of like a light bulb for her.
Yeah, for sure.
To say, is this the kind of care I would allow someone else to give my child? You know what I mean? So I think we have to really be aware of our own pull to these, these devices that give us these great dopamine hits. But I think, that's one of the big reasons that we wrote The Power of Showing Up, is not just for hyperparenting, antidote to say you don't need to do all that, but also because we're in a society where, the rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidality are higher than they've ever been in our history.
Right.
And I think a big part of that is sleep. And I think our devices have a huge role in our lack of sleep for kids and adults. I think another big part is that we are so distracted, and it's really sort of the opposite of presence and the opposite of belonging. And so I think as families, we have to make a commitment to really have moments where kids feel like they belong, that your attention is one of the biggest gifts you can give them, and you can't give them your attention all the time, and they actually don't even need it all the time. It's good for them to be bored. It's good for them to do other things, but they do need a chunk of time every day where you give them your full presence and your full attention. And I worry that our devices interfere with that, even if it's just 15 minutes, 20 minutes, because there's always something that's pinging or dinging or pulling us. And I just think it's such a distractor to the kind of presence that we all need, not just our children, but that we need in our own lives. And I keep hearing stories from parents who say, I'll be on my computer and my kid will come over and just close my computer and grab my face and say, look at me, like they're telling us, they're telling us.
Yep. They can't make it any more clear. And it's just, and again, I think it back to that practicing self-compassion of saying it's okay. And, I often talk about, we have that sword kind of pointed at ourselves being like, you suck. And, it's like, turn that out for a minute and be like, there's a cultural expectation of, busyness. And like you said, there is a dopamine reward, even the mom of the 18-month-old addicted to screens, right? Like, I'm sure she was struggling and tired, and she had an inner child that was just like, this isn't fair. My identity's changing. And so it was a nice distraction for her until it became too much. And she had the wisdom to ask you and change direction. And so it's more self-compassion around, it's okay to be here right now. And this isn't the kind of person I want to be. This isn't the kind of parent I want to be. So what do I do about it? And as a result of this conversation, the next most important step is that parents pick up The Power of Showing Up, how parental presence shapes who our kids become and how their brains get wired, because you go in detail for the 4 S's, the science, but in a really accessible way, but the practicality of here's what you want to do and why. And it's really brilliant. So, so helpful. And I know it's going to really make a difference in people's lives. It's already starting to make a difference in my life. And I'm really just so grateful that I'm grateful for your editor that said, no, get it out of here and make it its own book, actually. So thank you to you and to Dan and to your editor and everybody for bringing this book in the world.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So we know we can get the book anywhere, book, audiobook. I know because I got the audiobook version too, ebook. Where can people find and follow you? I know you run a whole organization and you speak. So if folks want to connect with you, what's the best place for that?
Yeah, and I'm all over the place. So I always love when people come out and say hi. Yeah, my website is tinabryson.com, TinaBryson. And there are little links there to all the social media stuff that, can distract you from being present with your child, but they're there for you.
Well, if we have a good, clean feed of helpful stuff, then we'll put the boundaries around that. So yes, no, that sounds great. I'll be sure to include that link. And especially if folks can check you out live, I think that would be amazing. And thank you for giving me your time today.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.